Iran just fired on a United States naval vessel in the Strait of Hormuz. Not a warning shot, not a close pass, an actual missile engagement against American forces. Then within 48 hours, Tehran issued a statement that can only be described as a retreat. This was not miscommunication. This was not an accident. This was a calculated test of American resolve that went catastrophically wrong for the Islamic Republic. By the time we are done here, you will understand exactly why Iran just proved something it desperately wanted to keep hidden, that its entire strategic doctrine in the Persian Gulf is now fundamentally broken. Welcome to States News. If this is your first time here, subscribe and turn on notifications because we are covering the most significant shifts in Middle Eastern power dynamics as they happen. And what just occurred in the Strait of Hormuz represents a watershed moment most analysts are completely missing. I am going to show you exactly what happened in those 48 hours, why Iran's response reveals far more than any attack ever could, and what this means for the balance of power in the most strategically critical waterway on Earth. We will cover the specific weapon systems involved, the tactical decisions that forced Tehran into retreat, and the second-order effects rippling through alliance structures from Riyadh to Tel Aviv. By the end, you will understand why this single engagement just redrew the map of deterrence in the Persian Gulf, and why Iran's Revolutionary Guard is now facing a strategic reality it cannot escape. Let's start with why the Strait of Hormuz matters so profoundly that nations have built entire military doctrines around controlling it. This is not just another shipping lane. 21 million barrels of oil pass through this choke point every single day. That represents roughly 21% of global petroleum consumption. The strait at its narrowest point is just 21 miles wide, with shipping lanes barely 2 miles across in each direction. Every major economy on Earth depends on this waterway remaining open. Japan, South Korea, China, India, the entire European Union, all of them rely on energy flowing through this gap between Iran and Oman. Iran has spent 4 decades building a military strategy designed specifically to exploit this geographic reality. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy operates over 200 fast attack craft, swarm boats designed to overwhelm larger vessels through sheer numbers. They have deployed anti-ship cruise missiles along the entire northern coast of the strait. They have positioned shore-based artillery, naval mines, and drone launch sites at strategic intervals. The entire doctrine rests on a single premise. Iran may not be able to defeat the United States Navy in open combat, but it can make the cost of keeping the strait open so devastating that Washington backs down. For years, this strategy worked as a deterrent. American planners knew that any conflict with Iran would immediately threaten global energy markets. The economic consequences of a closed Strait of Hormuz are genuinely catastrophic. Oil prices would spike to levels that trigger global recession. Supply chains would fracture. American allies in Europe and Asia would face energy crises within weeks. That economic leverage gave Tehran bargaining power far beyond what its actual military capabilities would suggest. But something has fundamentally changed in the past 18 months, and Iran just discovered it in the worst possible way. The United States has been quietly deploying new capabilities into the Persian Gulf that render Iran's swarm tactics increasingly obsolete. We are talking about directed energy weapons, specifically the AN/SEQ-3 laser weapon system, now operational on multiple vessels in the region. We are talking about upgraded SM-6 missiles with active radar homing that can engage multiple simultaneous targets. We are talking about integrated air defense networks that can track and eliminate hundreds of threats in minutes rather than hours. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps operates with a command structure that is both its strength and its fatal weakness. The IRGC Navy answers directly to the Supreme Leader, bypassing normal military chains of command. This gives them political authority and independence from the regular Iranian military. It also means they operate with a level of autonomy that can lead to catastrophic miscalculations when field commanders make tactical decisions without fully understanding strategic constraints. On March 11, 2026, an IRGC fast attack craft designated as part of the 3rd Naval District operating out of Bandar Abbas detected what they identified as a United States Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, approximately 18 nautical miles inside the strait. According to Iranian state media, the vessel was the USS Carney, DDG-64, conducting what the Pentagon describes as freedom of navigation operations. The IRGC craft, a PACAP-2 class fast attack boat armed with Chinese-made C-704 anti-ship missiles, locked targeting radar on the American destroyer. What happened next reveals everything about how badly Iran has misread the current balance of power. The IRGC craft launched a single C-704 missile at a range of approximately 8 nautical miles. This is not speculation. United States Central Command confirmed the launch within 3 hours and released radar tracking data showing the missile's flight path. The C-704 is a sea-skimming anti-ship missile with a range of 22 miles and a warhead weighing just under 130 kilograms. It is designed to hit fast-moving surface targets, and under normal circumstances, it represents a genuine threat to any vessel. Under normal circumstances. But these were not normal circumstances. The USS Carney detected the launch immediately. The ship's AN-SPY-1D radar system tracked the incoming missile from the moment it cleared the launch rail. Here is where Iranian planners fundamentally miscalculated what American capabilities now look like. The Carney did not deploy chaff. It did not activate electronic countermeasures. It did not fire interceptor missiles from its vertical launch system. Instead, the ship engaged with its laser weapon system, designated AN-SEQ-3, mounted on the aft superstructure. The laser engaged the C-704 at a range of approximately 2 miles. The system delivers a concentrated beam with enough energy to disable the missile's guidance systems and detonate its warhead safely away from the vessel. Total engagement time from detection to elimination was 11 seconds. Not 11 minutes. 11 seconds. The Iranian missile never got within a mile of the Carney. Debris from the destroyed missile fell harmlessly into the Persian Gulf approximately 400 meters from the IRGC attack craft that launched it. Think about what that means for a moment. Iran just tested American defensive capabilities with a real weapon in a real engagement and discovered that the technological gap has widened to a point where their primary offensive doctrine is now tactically ineffective. The IRGC boat that launched the missile immediately turned and retreated at maximum speed toward Iranian territorial waters. The Carney did not pursue. It did not need to. The demonstration was complete, but here is where the story gets genuinely interesting. Within 6 hours of the engagement, Iranian state media began reporting that the Revolutionary Guard had successfully defended Iranian territorial waters against American aggression. The initial reports claimed the IRGC had fired warning shots that forced an American vessel to retreat. There was no mention of a missile launch. There was no acknowledgement that the engagement had occurred outside Iranian territorial waters. The narrative was straightforward regime protection. Iran had stood firm, America had backed down, strength had prevailed. That narrative lasted exactly 23 hours. Then something unprecedented happened. The Iranian Foreign Ministry issued a statement characterizing the incident as a regrettable misunderstanding resulting from unclear communication protocols. They claimed the IRGC craft had misidentified the American vessel's intentions and that Iran remained committed to freedom of navigation in international waters. This represents a complete reversal from the initial triumphalist reporting. More importantly, it represents an admission that Iran cannot afford the consequences of what its own forces just initiated. What changed in those 23 hours? United States Central Command released the radar tracking data publicly. They released radio intercepts of the IRGC craft's communications before and after the launch. They released high-resolution satellite imagery showing the exact positions of both vessels at the time of engagement, definitively proving the incident occurred in international waters. Most devastatingly, they released footage from the Carney showing the laser engagement destroying the incoming missile. That footage is now available to every military analyst on Earth, including ones working in Beijing and Moscow. Iran just handed the United States the most valuable kind of intelligence, demonstrated proof of capability under combat conditions. Every defense ministry that considers the C-704 or similar Chinese anti-ship missiles as part of their arsenal now knows those systems can be defeated by directed energy weapons that are already deployed and operational. Every potential adversary planning swarm tactics against American vessels now understands that those tactics face a technological counter they may not be able to overcome. Iran did not just lose a single missile. They lost the credibility of their entire Persian Gulf deterrent strategy. Let's talk about what this means for regional power dynamics. Saudi Arabia has been watching Iranian naval posturing in the Persian Gulf for decades, with a mixture of concern and frustration. The Saudis depend on the Strait of Hormuz remaining open even more than the United States does. Roughly 70% of Saudi oil exports transit through that choke point. Every time Iran threatens to close the strait, Riyadh faces potential economic catastrophe. The Saudi military has invested billions in naval capabilities, specifically to counter Iranian fast attack craft, and they have never been confident those investments would prove sufficient in an actual conflict. Now, Saudi defense planners have confirmation that American directed energy systems can eliminate the exact threats Saudi Arabia fears most. This changes the calculus for Saudi-American security cooperation in fundamental ways. The Saudis have been hedging their bets for years, maintaining relationships with China and exploring alternatives to exclusive American security partnerships. But China does not have operational laser weapons systems deployed on surface combatants. Russia does not have them either. The technological gap between American defensive capabilities and what any alternative security partner can provide just became impossible to ignore. The same calculation is happening in Abu Dhabi, in Manama, in Kuwait City. Every Gulf state that depends on the strait remaining open just watched Iran test American defenses and fail catastrophically. The demonstration was more valuable than any weapons expo or military exercise could ever be. It was proof under actual combat conditions that the United States can defend the waterway against Iran's primary offensive capability. But there's another dimension to this that deserves attention, and it involves Israel. Israeli defense planners have spent years wargaming scenarios where Iran attempts to close the Strait of Hormuz in response to Israeli strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. The fear has always been that even if Israel successfully degrades Iran's nuclear program, the economic consequences of a closed strait would be so severe that Washington would pressure Jerusalem to accept some kind of compromise that leaves Iranian capabilities partially intact. That strategic constraint just weakened considerably. If American vessels can defend the strait against Iranian missile attacks using systems that do not even require expenditure of traditional munitions, then the economic leverage Iran has wielded for decades diminishes dramatically. Israel now has greater freedom of action against Iranian targets because the retaliatory option Iran has most consistently threatened looks increasingly unviable. This brings us to the question of what Iran does next. Tehran faces a genuinely difficult strategic problem. They cannot acknowledge publicly that their Gulf deterrence doctrine has been rendered obsolete, because doing so would undermine the regime's credibility with a domestic population already skeptical of government competence. They cannot escalate against American forces because further engagements will only produce more demonstrations of Iranian technological inferiority. But they also cannot simply accept this humiliation without response because that signals weakness to regional adversaries who are watching very carefully. The most likely Iranian response involves doubling down on proxy warfare in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. If direct confrontation with American naval forces is no longer viable, then asymmetric attacks through Houthi forces, Iraqi Shiite militias, and Hezbollah become more attractive options. We should expect increased attacks on commercial shipping using Houthi anti-ship missiles launched from Yemen. We should expect more sophisticated drone attacks against Saudi oil infrastructure. We should expect Iran to demonstrate capability and resolve in domains where American technological advantages are less pronounced. But that shift itself represents a strategic defeat for Iran. The entire point of Iran's Persian Gulf military posture was to maintain the credible threat of closing the Strait of Hormuz as leverage against American and allied pressure. If that threat is no longer credible, then Iran loses its most significant deterrent against regime-threatening interventions. They become more vulnerable, not less, even as they increase asymmetric attacks elsewhere. The directed energy weapons system that destroyed Iran's missile represents just the beginning of a broader technological shift that will reshape naval warfare in the next decade. The ANSEC-3 laser weapon system costs approximately $40,000 per installation. Each engagement costs essentially nothing beyond electricity consumption because there are no missiles to replace, no munitions to reload. Compare that to traditional ship-based missile defense systems, where each interceptor missile costs between $1 and $4 million. The economics of naval defense just shifted dramatically in favor of defending vessels. This has profound implications for how nations plan force structure and defense budgets. Traditional anti-ship missiles become far less valuable when directed energy systems can eliminate them at negligible cost. Swarm tactics that rely on overwhelming defenses through numbers become unviable when defenders can engage dozens of threats simultaneously without depleting munition stocks. The naval balance of power is shifting in ways that favor technologically sophisticated militaries over numerically superior forces. China is paying very close attention to what just happened in the Strait of Hormuz. Beijing has invested heavily in anti-ship missile capabilities specifically designed to threaten American carrier groups in the Taiwan Strait and South China Sea. The DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missile, the DF-26 intermediate-range missile, the YJ-18 anti-ship cruise missile, all of these systems represent core components of Chinese anti-access area denial strategy. If American directed energy systems can defeat missile threats in actual combat conditions, then Chinese military planners need to fundamentally reassess whether their investment strategy remains viable. Now let's acknowledge what this engagement has not accomplished. The United States demonstrated defensive capability against a single anti-ship missile under ideal conditions in relatively calm seas with clear visibility. That does not mean directed energy systems can handle every threat profile. Heavy fog, rain, or dust can degrade laser effectiveness. Multiple simultaneous attacks from different vectors still represent a genuine challenge. The system's maximum effective range remains classified, but physics suggests it is significantly shorter than traditional missile interceptors. Iran's entire arsenal has not been neutralized. Their shore-based missile batteries, their submarine force, their naval mines, all of those capabilities remain intact and dangerous. There are also questions about how this technology performs against more sophisticated threats. The C-704 is a capable missile but not a cutting-edge system. How would these directed energy weapons perform against supersonic missiles like the Russian P-800 Onyx or the Indian BrahMos? What about hypersonic missiles that China is developing? The technology is advancing rapidly, but so are the threats. This engagement proved that current-generation anti-ship missiles face new vulnerabilities, but it did not prove that all maritime threats have been solved. From Iran's perspective, this could be interpreted not as a comprehensive defeat, but as valuable intelligence gathering. They now know significantly more about American defensive capabilities, response times, and engagement protocols than they knew 48 hours ago. That information has value for future planning, even if the immediate tactical situation favored the United States. Iranian military planners are likely analyzing every detail of this engagement to identify weaknesses or gaps they can exploit in future scenarios. But that interpretation requires ignoring the political and psychological dimensions of what just occurred. Iran did not plan this as an intelligence-gathering operation. They tested American resolve, expecting either successful intimidation or, at minimum, a propaganda victory they could use domestically. Instead, they were forced into a humiliating public retreat that signals weakness to allies and adversaries alike. No amount of technical intelligence gathered compensates for the strategic cost of that demonstrated vulnerability. So what does this mean going forward? The immediate consequence is that American freedom of navigation operations in the Persian Gulf will likely increase in both frequency and boldness. Washington now has demonstrated proof that Iranian threats to those operations carry minimal actual risk. Expect more American vessels transiting closer to Iranian territorial waters, more frequent passages through the strait, and more public emphasis on maintaining international access to these waters. For Iran, the challenge becomes managing this new reality without appearing weak while simultaneously avoiding further engagements they are likely to lose. The regime's response will probably involve increased rhetoric about American aggression, combined with careful tactical restraint to avoid repeating the mistakes of March 11th. But that restraint itself signals that deterrence has shifted, and regional actors will adjust their behavior accordingly. Gulf Arab states will likely request additional American naval deployments and specifically request vessels equipped with directed energy weapons. These systems provide both practical defense and powerful signaling to Iran about the futility of maritime aggression. We should expect to see more joint exercises, more intelligence sharing, and deeper security integration between Washington and Gulf capitals. Israel will read this engagement as confirmation that American capabilities can manage Iranian retaliation even in worst-case scenarios. That may accelerate Israeli planning for strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities, particularly if intelligence suggests Tehran is approaching breakout capability. The constraint that mattered most, the fear of unmanageable economic consequences from a closed Strait of Hormuz, just became significantly less constraining. This is not the end of Iranian power in the Persian Gulf. Tehran retains significant capabilities and will continue to pose challenges to American interests and regional stability. But something fundamental shifted on March 11th. Iran tested American defenses and discovered the gap between their capabilities and American technology is wider than their strategic doctrine assumed. They were forced into public retreat, and that retreat signals to every regional actor that Iranian threats carry less credibility than they did 72 hours earlier. The balance of power in the Strait of Hormuz just moved, and it moved decisively in favor of the United States and its allies. Iran knows it. Saudi Arabia knows it. Israel knows it. And that knowledge will shape every strategic decision these actors make in the months ahead. We are watching in real time as decades of Iranian deterrence strategy confronts technological realities that may render that strategy obsolete. What comes next will determine whether Iran can adapt to this new strategic environment or whether March 11th marked the beginning of an irreversible decline in Iranian regional influence. If this analysis helped you understand why a single missile engagement in the Persian Gulf represents far more than just another incident in an ongoing standoff, subscribe to States News and turn on notifications. We are covering the technological, strategic, and political dimensions of conflicts that are reshaping global power dynamics, and we are doing it with the depth and precision this moment in history demands.